hello everyone. I'll go ahead and get started and I'll repeat my intro as more people come in. But first, let me say welcome. My name is Kimberly Bryant. I am the Director of Client Services here at Coleman Insights. Thank you guys so much for joining us today for the debut of our new monthly Ask Me Anything webinar series, or as you'll hear us refer to it as AMA. I appreciate you taking the time out to join us today, Wednesday, March 1st. Just a little information about AMA, our Ask Me Anything series. Each month, we will feature a different topic, and we'll spend a short 15 minutes answering your questions related to research, branding, and marketing strategy in audio entertainment. Thank you, everyone. Come on in, join us. I'm going to take just a few moments. Some of you will probably hear me repeat my intro. Want to make sure everyone knows what's going on. Thank you. Thank you so much. The debut of our Ask Me Anything. Those who did not hear, my name is Kimberly Bryant, the Director of Client Services here at Coleman Insights. On today's Ask Me Anything episode, we will be covering brand research versus content research. We've already received a bunch of great questions related to today's topic and that we will be answering. However, we do have a chat. If you have trouble reaching the chat, let me know. You can raise your hand. But there is a chat feature, so please feel free to post questions or comments in that chat. And if we have time, we will do our best to address those questions and comments. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump right in and introduce your hosts, Coleman Insights consultants Jay Nachlis and Meghan Campbell.
Thanks, Kim.
Jay and Meghan.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to see everybody here, and it's on the attendee list, a bunch of people joining us from different spots around the globe, which is very cool.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Well, great. I guess we'll just jump right on in. So our topic today, as I previously mentioned, is brand research versus content research. So I'll go ahead with our first question. And Meghan, if you'll answer this one, can you tell us the difference between brand research and content research?
Sure. Brand research explores your reputation and visibility in your marketplace. So are you top of mind? How many people are using your product or brand? And then what are those perceptions of your brand in the marketplace and your role in it? It can help you understand the characteristics that really set you apart from the competition. We call these differentiators or a competitive advantage. It can also uncover any weaknesses that might need to be addressed for your particular brand or for a competitor. Content research focuses instead on evaluating a brand's product. So in the audio brand, we're talking about the minute-by-minute content experienced by listeners. So that could be music, evaluating hosts or personalities, or what they might hear on a particular show, morning show, afternoon show, some of the content and benchmarks there.
Awesome. Great. Great explanation. Thank you, Meghan. Our next question will be for you, Jay. Can you give us an example of when a radio station would want to use brand research and when they would want to use content research?
Sure. Let me start with brand research, and I'll give you a real life example of one that came up relatively recently, and one that comes up from time to time. Let's say a radio station is going through some real rating struggles. Let's say they've got 6-7 months in a row where the ratings are down and it looks really troublesome, and the station is typically in a much better position ratings wise. And so, when that happens, and I know it having been in the program director chair, it's often human nature and inclination that you say, well, there's got to be something wrong that I'm doing or something wrong with the station. And so you start maybe tinkering with things and you look at the clock and say, what's wrong here? And what's wrong with the music? And what's wrong with the jocks? So what's the competition doing? And you start analyzing these things based on ratings. And it's our experience that could be a huge mistake. First and foremost, we all know about some of the sampling issues when it comes to ratings. We know that 1 or 2 meters or diaries can throw everything into major chaos or askew. And so, this particular program director in this instance said, before making these changes based on these numbers, let's take a look under the hood. And what we found in that study was that that the perceptions of the station were far better than the ratings suggested. So one of the things we're able to say is, well, it's going to take some patience and intestinal fortitude, hang on, because we believe that the ratings are going to come back. But that wasn't the only thing, because then we also, because we're doing a perceptual study, we're able to find out opportunities for the station. And we were able to discover that they were actually a bit misaligned from what their perceptions were and where their music was and where their messaging was. So we're able to shift those things. Some of the natural numbers came back and the station's doing really well now. But that's an example of, don't overreact on the ratings until you get a real good big picture. Content research kind of goes back to something Meghan was saying a second ago. And an example of that would be using content research for one of your personality shows, right? So maybe a morning show, an afternoon show that does a lot of bits, a lot of benchmarks, and you've got questions about them, how long they are, the tone, characters, all that type of stuff. And so rather than doing this kind of large scale brand study, you dig really deep and probe into how that content is doing and why they're evaluating it that way.
Great examples. Thank you, Jay. I have a question here from John. We've seen a lot of non-com radio brands performing very well in PPM measurement lately. In many cases, these brands are very broad, very deep, and unfamiliar. Are you seeing any trends in research which explain this? Meghan, why don't you answer this question for John?
Sure. I can't speak to this globally. I know that many non-com radio stations are very different, so I don't want to put them all in the same bucket. But we've had some themes that have really come out of a lot of our qualitative studies recently. These are Campfire online discussion groups. And we've had the pleasure of working with some non-com stations. And the biggest theme that came out of these groups is community, a sense of community. And, we've talked about differentiators. Jay gave some examples too. And a lot of the non-com stations have a little bit more flexibility in that they are a little niche. They are a little bit different than commercial mainstream stations. And those that gravitate towards these brands and the products that they're on those stations is they're really passionate about that. And they feel like they found a group of like-minded people. We've all changed the way we interact with our world since the pandemic. And the sense of community really seems to be a big draw to these types of stations, at least in the qualitative research we've done. And we're even seeing that carry over into some of our commercial stations that are chasing that avenue of community and really boosting that sense of community among their listeners.
Yeah, it's really a combination of, it's that combination of brand and content. And these stations can be really deep. We call it the image pyramid, but they can go deep on the image pyramid and have these real deep images amongst their personalities and the features that they're running, shows that they're running, and community, which Meghan really mentioned. And so when they really get good at in the moment content, which is that content piece of it, and you have that intersection, which is, PPM is really, watching for that. So when you have the brand that brings them in and they get better at execution, those stations will perform better.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay, let's see my questions here. All right. Don has a question. It feels there is more innovation on digital platforms than on air, where there is more proven methods. Should there be more innovation on air, and how do you research that?
Yeah, it's always risky when you're throwing new ideas out, on the big stick, on the big channels. But I would say that there's a couple things I would say. One is we've talked a lot about some innovation and some ideas, and Blue Ocean strategy is something we've talked a lot about. I'd encourage you to go back to our Tuesdays with Coleman blogs and look at a couple of those on Blue Ocean strategy, which in a nutshell is finding a lane that is unoccupied. in your market. And rather than trying to swim with the sharks in this blood-infested waters, what lane can you find that's unoccupied? That might be a smaller lane, but it's one that you can own. A lot of times that makes sense for like HD channels. It makes sense for stations on translators, more so than the regular signals. But we really encourage, when you try something, here's what sometimes happens is stations that try things and try new things don't necessarily measure those things, or they don't give it enough time. Those are like the mistakes that are made. And so what we say is like research should really be used not just to research things that you're already doing, but do try new things strategically, right? Think about things that do fit your brand. Don't just completely throw things against the wall and see what sticks, but strategically think about what can I add to my radio station that's going to support the brand, and then wait. Don't measure it and research right away. Give it time to get familiar and to get people engaged with it and understand what it's all about. And then, after about a year, then measure it and see how it's doing, and then track it over time.
Patience and tracking.
Yeah, definitely.
And the patience, I know the patience is hard, but it's important.
Certainly.
Absolutely. All right, let's see here. I think we have time for one more question. Maybe two. Let's see. Okay, this is a good one from Nancy. Our station has never done research. We think the music and personalities are on target, but performance has been down and we have a lot of questions. Where do we start? Ooh, good question.
I'll jump in. I think Jay and I are probably on the same page here. I think that ideally everyone would start with brand research. First of all, it gives you a really macro view of your brand and all the other brands that you compete with. And it helps you build your strategy. So once you learn whether you're top of mind or not, and how you stack up versus competitors, who's using your station or your product, and then what perceptions are about your brand, you can then make a strategy to take that in the direction you want it to go. Lean into those competitive advantages, those differentiators. It also gives you an idea of how you should market your station, what kind of verbiage you should use to describe it so that everybody knows what you're actually providing to them. So I would definitely start with brand research. I know we're oftentimes limited by our pocketbook, and sometimes content research can be a little faster. But really, I think that if at all possible, in an ideal world, you're starting with your brand research so you can establish your strategy for the music that you're playing, for your morning show, whatever it is that you need to evaluate. And then you're able to carry it out and then get those feedback with your content research later on as a secondary step.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we'll go ahead and just do one more question before we end it. And this is actually a question of myself that I have, which is what, Jay and Meghan, if you maybe both of you can answer this, what are some trends that you're currently seeing when it comes to brand research?
I'll start with one thing, and then Meghan, maybe you can mention another thing. But one thing that I think has been kind of interesting is how we've seen some of the shifting patterns in appeal and compatibility. And the 90s is one example that I'll give. And it's just something, that I've been with Coleman for a little over 5 years, almost 6 years. And you've just seen how this shifts over time. And it varies by market, which is just another point where, local research can be really valuable because it's not always exactly the same. But, even just a few years ago, 90s had really big compatibility issues. It was still very risky to play on classic rock stations. And, now you're seeing this evolution take place. And not only is the appeal there, but it's starting to be compatible with some of the older styles as well. You're starting to see this in AC formats, more contemporary formats as well. So, that's the kind of thing that over time you see shift that you just wouldn't notice and know when these things are taking place without the benefit of research.
Probably showing my age when I say I'm a little bit excited about that trend.
Yeah.
Definitely.
As far as other trends we've seen, I brought up community that I've seen in a lot of the qualitative research we've done recently. But another thing that we've seen, and this has really been over the last several years, is just a reduction in awareness top of mind brands. And that is radio brands, that is other media brands. Coming out of the pandemic, everybody's behavior changed. And this is kind of a time of we all need to reintroduce our brands. I know, marketing always costs money, getting the word out. That's always a pain point, but really behaviors changed, travel patterns changed, just daily lives. Everybody's lives were really changed a lot. And so we really need to reintroduce these brands, get them back in the forefront of everyone's mind so that they think of us when they get into their car or go about their day. Yeah, those are the two biggest ones on my end.
And I'll just add to that real quick that a link that we tend to see in study after study is stations with the highest amount of unaided awareness are the ones with the highest amount of QM. It's really pretty simple. And if you really think about it, you can't get listened to if you're not top of mind. So when you're choosing to listen to a few radio stations, you've got to be one of those 2 or 3 that they're thinking about. And if you're not on that radar, and as Meghan said, it really is a time of reintroduction. Maybe a few years ago, it was a whole different situation for unaided awareness for your brand, and that could have completely shifted for you, and other stations have gone like this. So,
yeah. Well, thank you, Jay and Meghan, so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our debut episode. That is all the time we have. If you asked a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it, or even if you have follow-up questions to what we've discussed today, please feel free to reach out to one of the 3 of us. I did post all 3 of our email addresses in the chat. And I really hope that you guys can join us for our next episode, which will be on Wednesday, March 29th. And we will be answering your questions on podcasting. So very exciting. Keep an eye on your email and our website for registration information. But until then, we'll see you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.